Well, we've all been building our family trees, but have you ever actually looked at your family tree? What does it tell you or other people about your families? Family trees are really just catalogues of names, but not much more. For example, let me give you an example from my own family. If I tell you that my four great-grandfathers were Theodore, James, Alexander, and Philip, which is what you can see from the family tree, what do you know about my family? Nothing really. But if I tell you that Theodore was an English naval surgeon whose researches in genealogy triggered my interest in family history, that James was a Scot and by occupation an ostrich feather merchant who died in a lunatic asylum, that Alexander was a County Londonderry farmer who emigrated to Canada in 1852, but then changed his mind and came back to Ireland, and that the other great-grandfather, Philip, was a County Cork shopkeeper who died after accidentally shooting himself. Then you know much more about my forebears, and you realize just how variable these different branches of the family are, and how interesting all these different branches are. Probably tells you quite a lot about me as well, as I'm descended from those four. So it's stories like these which really bring a family tree to life. And too many people just spend their time building the family tree without finding out the stories about the people in it. But if you're trying to interest other members of your family, then it's the stories that they're looking for rather than just the catalogue of names. So where can we find these stories? We can find them in many places. Even to my surprise, I found some on eBay. But today I want to consider three printed forms: newspapers, books, and particularly journals, which we'll come to in a moment. Now, newspapers are a great resource, and I'll just give you one example. I have been trying to trace my grandfather's brother, Robert, who left Ireland, emigrated to the USA to train racehorses. Now, the problem with horsemen is that they went from one race course to another, and they tended to not be recorded anywhere very much. For example, they very often don't get recorded in census terms. But searching an online newspaper archive, to my surprise, produced many hits in a Chicago-based paper that was entirely new to me, the Daily Racing Form, which is not something I would normally read. But there it was. It listed every race with the horses he trained, their owners, and the results. So I was able to build up a very good picture of his life in the USA. So that's just one example. Most of the stories I found about people have actually come from newspapers. So can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. Now, modern newspapers are full of big headlines, big pictures, big advertisements, and they're primarily funded by advertisers. Old local papers had dense text covering all sorts of international, national, and local news. And because they were funded mainly by purchasers, they named as many people as they could in the hope that each person named would rush out and buy a copy. And just looking at some old newspapers from, say, the 1700s, 1800s, you immediately see this. They covered all sorts of activities which nowadays would rarely be covered. Ireland was, or Ulster, has always been very political, and there were lots of big meetings, petitions and so on, and papers tried to list everybody who attended the meeting or signed the petition. And these lists of names often went on for column after column after column. And then during the quieter months like August, they would even actually list the people who were staying in guest houses in Portrush, just so that they could get lots of names into their papers. So they're a good source of information about people who would not normally appear anywhere else very much. And the British Newspaper Archive has scanned and automatically indexed millions of pages of British and Irish papers. These are also available on Find My Past, if you have a subscription to that. There's also the Irish News Archive, which covers a number of other papers in Ireland. These are subscription websites. If you're lucky enough to have Welsh or Manx or Australian or New Zealand relatives, there are excellent free websites listed on the right. And there are plenty of others, quite a number covering American papers and so on. What's also interesting is that Australian and New Zealand papers often covered a lot of material from material that was happening in the UK. So you may well find things there that you don't expect to find. The other thing is old papers copied articles from other papers. And so very often you will find things where you don't expect them. So just search papers as a whole rather than one particular paper. For example, I found an account of a burglary in my great-grandfather's house in London in a Birmingham newspaper. The article was of interest because the burglar found a plum cake and some whiskey and made himself very comfortable and fell fast asleep. He was woken up in the morning. So newspapers are excellent. We go on to the next slide, please, which is on books. You may think that your family never featured in any book, but you may be surprised. I was. It turned out that my 4 times great-grandfather, John Preston, wrote, illustrated, published a book in 1819, and I now have it on my Kindle, which is a nice surprise. His brother Isaac was mentioned in this little cutting here. At the age of 20, was master of a ship, the Esther, which returned from Zakynthos in the Ionian Islands with a cargo of currants. And because we were at war with the French then, time of the French Revolution, his ship was captured by 3 French ships on the 28th of May, 1794. And he and his crew of 7 were imprisoned in Quimper in Brittany, where sadly 4 of the crew died. And a few pages of Isaac's pocketbook were printed in 1890, which is what you see on the screen here, beginning of it. So that's really a major story, quite out of the blue, just from searching books. You'll be pleased to know that those 3 French ships were later captured by the British and incorporated into the Royal Navy. So at least we got our own back. Now, moving on to the next slide, journals. This is a source we really want to concentrate on today. Journals, family history journals, local history journals, are full of articles about local people and where they lived, worked, and died. For example, the green one at the bottom right, the band disc, covers a Coleraine area, the north coast of Ireland. The blue one, top left, the Cale Miscellany, covers the southeast of County Down, and so on. And they're absolutely full of articles, but the problem is journals are very rarely used by genealogists for 2 reasons. Few are easily accessible, and few have been indexed. So the Society now can offer our members 2 ways of finding material in journals. And the first, if we move on to the next slide, please, is that in our library, we have runs of 50 or so different titles. Now, they're not indexed by surname, but we have two very useful files which are available online in our website. One is a list of articles containing gravestone inscriptions extracted from most of these journals. So, for example, if your family was in Ballintoy Parish on the north coast, you can ask if your surname features in the article in the Glynns, Volume 12, 1984, page 12. We have a free lookup service here. Perhaps met Kathleen Morrison before we started this. She provides a very good lookup service, which is free for members. The other file, miscellaneous records, this consists of articles with, for example, lists of residents or immigrants, hearth money rolls, or census strays, church registers, newspaper extracts, biographies, family histories, passenger lists, things like that. And so if you find an article that seems to be of interest, you could ask for a lookup in, for example, the article Ballintoy Religious Census 1734, which is in a different article in the Glynns, 1997, page 30. So do make use of these lookups. Of course, if you're in Northern Ireland, you can come and do them yourself in the library. So that's one thing. The other thing, if we move on to the next slide, please, is JSTOR. Now, I know quite a number of you already use JSTOR, but a great many more don't, and they're rather missing out. JSTOR, which stands for Journal Storage, is a website based in America, which archives a vast range of journals from a great many disciplines. Some medicine, some engineering, and so on, some historical. And these are organized into a number of collections. Now, one of these collections is the Ireland collection, which contains over 70, I think it is, Irish journals, including our own journal, North Irish Roots, edited by Audrey McKeag. These are automatically indexed and done very well. And as each new journal comes out, they're sent to JSTOR. JSTOR scans them, stores them, indexes them. Most journals aren't entirely up to date. Societies producing these journals generally want the most recent ones not to be available immediately. So in most cases, the most recent 3 years issues are not available, but the older ones contain a wealth of information. Now, if we move on to the next slide, to use JSTOR, you simply go to the Society's website, nifhs.org, and you will see a login menu. If you click on that, there are two options. One is to give you access to the members area, and the other is JSTOR access. So select JSTOR access, and then moving on to the next slide, you type the username and password. Now, these are changed every year, and when you join for the first time or when you renew, you're sent an email which contains that year's username and password. So type those in, and then at the bottom, you see there's a little login box to click. This brings up a page with a long list of links to all the journals. But the important thing is that at the top, there is a box containing the JSTOR badge, which you can see circled here. Click on that. Don't click on one of the journals. Click on the JSTOR one, and that will give you free access, remember, to the Ireland collection. So moving on, please, to the next slide. There are two options here. Up at the top, there's a search box. So you can put in some keywords, perhaps a surname, perhaps a place, and it will search for anything with those keywords. Or if you know where you want to go, a particular article in North Irish Roots, down at the bottom, click on North Irish Roots. And what Audrey will be explaining about soon will be a list, an index, if you like, to all the articles in North Irish Roots. So using that, you can go straight to the article by clicking on that North Irish Roots link. And next slide, please. I'll give you one example of a gem that I found. This was in an article on Ellis Island, the immigration experience. It was published 1998, so quite a long time ago. If you just click on the 1990s, up comes a list of the volumes, click on volume 9, number 1, and there's a table of contents. So you can click on this particular article, and it includes a gem. And I'll let you read that gem for yourself. But finding a story like that makes it worthwhile, doesn't it?